They relied on my ability to understand. Not once or twice, but as a permanent role I was never asked if I wanted. Understanding became my responsibility, my obligation, my silence. And the strange part is this. The moment I stopped explaining myself, the moment I chose distance instead of empathy, that's when they finally noticed me. I used to believe that being understanding made me strong. I told myself it meant I was evolved, emotionally intelligent, mature enough to see both sides. When someone hurt me, I searched for their reasons. When they disappointed me, I filled in the gaps with empathy. I learned to soften every reaction, to translate their behavior into something I could tolerate. Over time, people began to rely on that version of me. The one who didn't react too fast. The one who didn't take things personally. The one who always said, "I get it." And at first, I liked that role. It made me feel necessary, trusted, chosen as the safe place where consequences never landed. But something quietly shifted. Understanding stopped being a choice and became an expectation. If I questioned anything, I was reminded of how patient I usually was. If I pulled back, I was told I wasn't being fair. My empathy wasn't appreciated anymore. It was assumed, and assumptions have a way of turning generosity into obligation without ever asking permission. It didn't happen all at once. That's the part most people miss. Emotional exploitation rarely announces itself. It creeps in through familiarity, through repetition, through the quiet belief that you'll always be the one who understands. At first, it was small things. Canceled plans that were always explained later. Words that landed wrong, followed by justifications instead of apologies. Moments where I felt dismissed, then immediately felt guilty for feeling that way. I told myself they were stressed, busy, dealing with their own struggles. I reminded myself that no one is perfect. And because I understood, they never had to change. Each time something bothered me, I translated it into something more reasonable. I filtered their behavior through compassion until it barely hurt anymore. But what I didn't realize was that I was also filtering out my own limits. I was training myself to absorb discomfort quietly. They started leaning on that. Not consciously at first. But patterns don't need intent to be harmful. They noticed that I didn't push back, that I didn't escalate, that I didn't leave. So the space they took grew larger. The weight they handed me got heavier. Whenever I hinted at being tired, the response was always the same. A story, a reason, a reminder of everything they were dealing with. And I listened. I always listened. I nodded, reassured, adjusted myself. Understanding became the currency that kept the relationship functioning, but only in one direction. There were moments when I felt something was wrong, but I couldn't name it. Nothing dramatic had happened. No single betrayal.
No obvious villain.
Just a slow erosion of balance. I was always accommodating. They were always receiving. And somehow, that was labeled as harmony. The more understanding I became, the less visible my needs were. They stopped checking in.
Stopped asking how I felt.
Stopped noticing when I went quiet. Because quiet was normal for me. Silence had become my contribution. And here's the part that's hardest to admit. I helped create this dynamic. Every time I explained away my discomfort, I taught them that it wasn't serious. Every time I stayed calm instead of honest, I reinforced the idea that I could handle anything. I became reliable in a way that erased me. There were nights I replayed conversations in my head, wondering if I was being unfair, if expecting more made me demanding, if wanting space meant I lacked empathy. I questioned myself far more than I questioned them. That imbalance alone should have been a warning. The guilt was constant. Guilt for feeling drained. Guilt for wanting distance. Guilt for imagining a version of myself that didn't always have to understand. I told myself that good people don't pull away. Good people endure. Good people stay soft. But endurance has a cost. And softness without boundaries doesn't stay soft forever. It hardens into resentment. The first time I tried to express that I was overwhelmed, it didn't land. My words were met with confusion, not concern. I was reminded of how patient I usually was, how supportive, as if my past empathy disqualified my present exhaustion. So, I tried again later. Gentler. Clearer. And again, the response wasn't cruelty. It was expectation. Expectation that I would understand why things couldn't change. Expectation that I would adapt. That's when I noticed something unsettling. My understanding was being used as a shield. As long as I understood, no one had to take responsibility. As long as I empathized, no one had to adjust their behavior. I began to feel invisible in my own presence, like my role was to absorb, not to exist. And the more invisible I felt, the more I retreated inward. I spoke less, explained less, not because I was calm, but because I was tired. They didn't notice the shift at first. Why would they? Distance is subtle before it's obvious. I stopped offering immediate reassurance, stopped filling silences, stopped making their discomfort my job. And with every small withdrawal, I felt both relief and fear. Relief because I was finally conserving energy. Fear because I didn't know who I was without being the understanding one. Then came the moment when I realized the truth I had been avoiding. They didn't miss me when I was understanding. They only noticed me when I wasn't. The first time I chose not to explain myself, it created tension. The first time I didn't smooth things over, it was labeled as distance. The first time I stepped back, I was asked what was wrong. That question lingered. Not because it was caring, but because it was revealing. My presence had been taken for granted. My empathy had been invisible. Only its absence was loud enough to register. I started choosing distance deliberately. Not out of anger, not to punish, but to protect what was left of me. I stopped overclarifying, stopped justifying my feelings, stopped proving that I understood. And the reaction was immediate. Confusion, frustration, subtle guilt-inducing remarks. I was told I was changing, becoming cold, losing my softness, as if self-preservation was a flaw. But something surprising happened too. In the quiet space I created, I began to hear myself again. I noticed how much lighter I felt without carrying explanations that weren't mine. I noticed how my thoughts were clearer when they weren't constantly orbiting someone else's needs. Distance didn't make me cruel. It made me honest. I realized that understanding, when expected, stops being a gift. It becomes labor. Emotional labor that goes unpaid, unacknowledged, and unlimited. And unlimited labor always leads to burnout. The more I held my distance, the more the dynamic revealed itself. They struggled without my constant reassurance. They stumbled when I didn't absorb the tension. They finally had to sit with the discomfort they used to hand me. And that's when it became clear. My empathy had been cushioning them from consequences. Distance removed the cushion. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply no longer compensating. There were moments I almost went back. Moments when guilt crept in, whispering that I was being selfish. That real care requires sacrifice. But I had already sacrificed enough to know the difference between love and endurance. Understanding should be voluntary. When it's demanded, it's no longer understanding. It's compliance. And compliance wears a kind face while slowly erasing you. With distance came clarity. Not immediately, but gradually. I began to see the pattern without the emotional fog. How often my empathy had been used to delay accountability. How often my patience had replaced communication. How many times I had been praised for understanding instead of being supported. I started asking myself uncomfortable questions. Why was I so afraid of being misunderstood? Why did I equate distance with cruelty? Why did I believe that my value depended on how much I could tolerate? The answers weren't flattering, but they were freeing. I had learned to be the safe place because it kept me needed. I had confused being needed with being valued. Distance broke that illusion. Some connections weakened. A few disappeared entirely. And that hurt. But what hurt more was realizing how fragile they were without my constant emotional effort holding them together. In the space that followed, I began rebuilding my sense of self without overextension. I practiced letting people sit with their feelings, letting silence exist, letting relationships reveal their true shape without my constant adjustment. Not everyone stayed, but the ones who did learn something important. That access to me wasn't unconditional. That empathy had boundaries. That understanding didn't mean self-erasure. Distance didn't make me smaller. It made my presence intentional. They expected my understanding because I had trained them to. I chose distance because I finally understood myself. So here's the question I'll leave you with. When someone relies on your empathy, do they protect it or do they consume it? And when you step back, is that abandonment or is it dignity finally speaking? If this story felt uncomfortably familiar, sit with that. Reflect on it. And if you want to explore more of these quiet reversals, stay here. Sometimes the most powerful boundary is simply choosing distance.